People who are ghosting other people, have you ever been called out? If so, how did that make you feel? Oh yeah, I can answer this. This happened 9 years ago, when I was a teenager. I'd started dating a guy who I really, really liked. He did not like my best friend and would often make fun of her. I felt like my friendship with her was coming to an end anyway because we were drifting apart, so I didn't stop him. His toxic behavior actually made me start resenting her. Eventually, I just ghosted her. Left her on red, never hung out with her anymore. We didn't go to the same school, so I just never saw her. She sent me a long message asking why I was not talking to her. Did she make me mad? Did she do something wrong? It was a really heartbreaking message, and I pretty much told her that I felt like we weren't close anymore, that I was in a good relationship and I didn't feel like we were friends anymore. She responded by basically saying she understood with a sad face. I didn't talk to her for almost a year. I'm not sure what the push was. I was still dating the guy, but I missed her. And I texted her a very long message apologizing and groveling that I was wrong and stupid. Not sure what came over me, etc. She forgave me. I don't know why. I pulled a really awful move, and I know I did it when she was at a low point. I'm so extremely grateful that she decided to give me another chance. We're still best friends to this day, but her confronting me when I initially ghosted her was absolutely miserable and heartbreaking. I still feel like such a piece of trash for it. That's a classic teenage blunder. It's like choosing sides in a game of emotional tug-of-war. Story 2. An old ex from college got in touch with me via Facebook, which was lovely and a tiny bit concerning. Had a great time catching up, getting in touch with old friends from college via this exchange. Seriously, this was the best part of that, etc. His life turned out pretty much as I expected. Numerous divorces, presumably some infidelity in his part, etc. Several months into our very polite chats, he suddenly shifts gears hard. He's spouting birther nonsense, trying to get me to leave my husband for him. Literally haven't seen his ex in 20 plus years, and no way in hell is that going to happen. I blocked him on social media and didn't think twice about it afterwards. About 6 months later, a mutual college friend started lecturing me about why I'd ghosted the ex while he was deployed in Afghanistan. How dare I ghost a veteran who needed our support, etc. And how hurt my ex was that I'd cut off our friendship. Oh boy. Here's the thing. I kept a screenshot of his terrible lies to show my husband, and each time one of my college friends started with that nonsense, I sent them the screen cap. One of the guys was so mad, he told my ex that if he didn't stop that, he'd send it to his current wife. Haven't heard anything since. Going on 8 years now. I don't expect to. Story 3. I'm currently ghosting 2 friends. They're a married couple that wanted to bring me into the relationship. It didn't end well, and after 2 months of not speaking to each other, they reached out again. I was willing to reestablish only friendship, but they still were pushing for me to be romantic with a wife. I was pretty uncomfortable and felt anxious about it, especially after the fallout, and decided for everyone's safety and well-being, I needed to block them. They sorely lacked adequate communication for a 3-way relationship and were pretty manipulative with me and used my naivety and trust in them to get what they wanted. Sometimes, ghosting is the answer. Not always. If there's a chance to discuss it rationally, then do it. But if you don't have that chance, ghost. I consider this ghosting because I got contact without an explanation on seemingly good, in their POV terms. I've always thought that this is what ghosting was. The only time I expressed I wanted their friendship was when we initially reconnected after the fight. After that, they began pursuing me again, and I decided to completely block them without talking to them about it further. Story 4. I've ghosted, but usually don't get called out. I used to be honest, but having more than one dude call me names for not thinking they were a good match stopped that habit. Worst was a dude I'd gone on a couple dates with. He was nice enough, just a little too odd and clingy. Insisted on picking me up. I refused and met him instead. Insisted on driving me to the theater between dinner and the movie. I refused again. Then acted weird in the theater, yelling at people if they coughed so much. After the movie, he was bold enough to go for a kiss. I did the cheek turn thing, then left. The 20 minutes it took me to get home, there were over a dozen texts, each one more frantic than the last because I hadn't replied yet. I immediately noped out and ghosted. For weeks, I got messages before he told me, "You thought I was better than this." But then I'd get the odd text like it was testing the water. The weirdest was, Shamrock Shake. Want one, Lexi? I'm very glad he didn't have my home address. I'm not one to ghost people, but I definitely would have ghosted that creep. Probably way safer to just cut all contact. Story 5. My mom got really overbearing with calls after I moved away for college. While I understood that she missed me and worried, I had to talk to her about how I couldn't possibly be expected to immediately answer every single call all day long. Not even just because I was busy with school, but because I was on my own and trying to figure out adulthood and have a life. No one else was dealing with this, and people were starting to joke about my mommy calling me constantly. I got her to start texting me instead so I could reply when it was convenient to me. And that worked for a short while until she started texting me late at night. And if I didn't reply until the next day, she accused me of ignoring her. So she basically started treating the texts the same as the calls and expecting me to reply to them all day long. Lol. I still felt guilty about it for way too long. Years after college, even. I would constantly explain and make excuses for why I didn't reply right away. Until I was visiting one Christmas and she mocked me in front of other family members, repeating a few of my excuses with a funny voice as if I were a toddler. I was like, all right, lady, I'm so done with this. I'll save myself the time and effort I'm clearly wasting on giving a single care about how you feel. And from that point on, I just ignored all her attempts at contact until I was in the mood to talk to her. And I gave no excuses. When she complains, I ignore that too. Not my problem anymore. She still calls and texts way more than she needs to, but I have her ring or text tone set to silent so they don't bother me now. Story 6. I dated a guy for a year. Thought things were going well, and then one day he just stopped talking to me. He blocked me through every possible form of communication. 5 months later, I got a text in the middle of the night saying how sorry he was. He couldn't believe he let me go, and was there ever a possibility we could get back together? I, being the petty, terrible, grudge-holding person that I am, agreed on my terms. I told him I wanted to take things slowly, so I didn't see him in person again. But for about 3 weeks, I let him on through texts and phone calls. And then I did the exact same thing that he did to me. I blocked him through every possible means in which he might contact me and never spoke to him again. Part of me wants to feel bad about what I did, but honestly, I have no regrets at all. Maybe that makes me a bad person, but after over a year of giving my all to someone, just to have my heart completely ripped out with no explanation, I figured 3 weeks of hope and getting a taste of his own medicine was little penance for him to pay. Story 7. Late, so I'm not expecting much, but I think it's worth saying. I ghost people almost every time I get a text. I also have ADHD. Makes me feel incredibly guilty and is, in the vast majority of cases, absolutely unintentional. As far as my mindset goes, I usually think something along the lines of, I'll respond once I'm finished, current task, and then I write down a reminder to respond. I will frequently either forget to check the reminder or push it off for so long, 24 plus hours for responding to a casual text from a friend, that I feel too guilty and anxious to respond, so I push it off further. It becomes a vicious cycle and it makes having social relationships really difficult. This is compounded when the response that I have to write involves looking up some kind of information or coordinating plans. Like if someone asks if I want to meet somewhere and they ask what time, there are then 2 barriers I have to overcome to respond. Figuring out when and where I can meet and then communicating that information to them. Responding to a text or an email may seem basic for a lot of people, but it becomes really debilitating and I have a reputation as someone who doesn't respond. I'm called out all the time for this, and I feel bad for it. I've lost friendships and opportunities over this. That being said, taking my medication makes it 100% easier for me to respond to a text. If I've taken my medication and I get a text, it feels like the mental barrier of how much effort it takes to respond has been lowered. Story 8. I'm a guy in my 30s and have this happen to me often in online dating. From randomly ghosted mid-conversation to ghosted just before we were supposed to meet, to ghosted after the first date and so on. It does hurt a little, as most of the women I speak to seem genuinely nice. And I'm then surprised how they do not have the common courtesy to openly say they're not interested anymore. When I was new to it all and didn't understand how common this was, or what was going on, I would double message. This then resulted in either not getting a reply or in a short fake conversation that ended just as fast. Except this time I could feel how little care was given through the messages. What I would suggest you do is stop being selfish and think it is about you. If they talk to several people at once, it might simply be that they ran out of energy when it came to you. It is awful, but it is not something you have done, as much as you simply aren't a good match. Not all the ghosters are people without emotions out there to hurt others, and many may not simply be the best at communication. The best advice I can give is to stop wondering why they did it and simply accept the fact that they did, and move on. I have no experience in being ghosted after I'd been in a relationship with someone, and from the comments I've read, this really feels awful. As for ghosters who ghost and then return later, do not engage. These people only do it as they need affirmation, and you don't have to be anyone's spare wheel. Story 9. So one time, this girl and I went on a date. She really, really wanted to go out that night. About 30 minutes in, she's checking her phone, looking worried. She tells me she has a workout planned in half an hour at 8:30 on a Thursday. I say, "Did you plan multiple dates tonight, but you weren't sure whether to stay here or go on the other one?" She had. I told her she could leave, but I would never waste time on her again. We went to another bar and she made fun of me for wearing a seatbelt in an Uber because who wears seatbelts in a taxi? I was like, it's still a car. That part is not material to the story other than that she was dumb. Yada yada, we made out and said goodnight and she didn't respond to further texts. Weeks later, I'm at a Sunday Fun Day event for a buddy. We have the booth right by the exit. I see this girl clearly on another dating app. She's going to basically have to bump into me to leave. And as she does this ridiculous gasp, freezes, grabs her date, and runs. I was extremely laughing. I texted her and said, "Hi, it's okay that you didn't want to date me or text me back, but you can say hi next time you see me and we can be friends." And she texts back, "That would be great. I just moved here and don't know a lot of people and having a Halloween party with a bunch of cute girls who are single. So I brought a friend. It was great. I was friends with her for a while. Eventually, a few years later, met a girl on Bumble who turned out to be her best friend. That girl ghosted me too." Here's the thing though. Nobody owes anyone anything on these apps. It's not like the old days where you have to meet through friends or work or connected social spheres. If you go on 2 app dates and even be with a stranger, you don't owe them anything and you aren't owed anything. Yes, it would be nice, but the app should literally come with a disclaimer that no one owes anyone anything and don't expect it. Planning a workout in the middle of a date? That's a new level of multitasking. It's like she was trying to fit in a squat session between sips of her cocktail. Story 10. I'm currently engaged with my partner of 5 years and recently reconnected with an old friend over Facebook. Immediately, the old friend in question started asking me very uncomfortable details about my relationship with my fiancé. I told her I wasn't comfortable disclosing anything that personal. Her and I weren't even close friends, basically friendly acquaintances, if you will. One night she calls me in a panic. She's attempting to end it all. I can't do anything as she lives in a few states over, so I call her mom instead. Finally, after a good while, she gets back to me and has been in a mental ward for quite some time. Eventually, over the course of a couple of months, she starts subtly dropping hints she tried to end herself because I'm a bad friend for not dating her. I'm going to cut this story a bit short as she raised giant red flags every time we spoke. Anyhow, a few days prior to me ghosting her, she told me she had met a guy in some RPG game and that they were going to get married there and asked if I was okay with that. I told her immediately she doesn't need to ask me that. I'm not emotionally or physically interested in her at all. Harsh, I know, but as I said, I'm engaged to my very beautiful fiancé. When I say she snapped, I mean she snapped. She sent me threatening emails about going to end herself, how I should just be with her instead. I owe her that for being so kind to me. I never vented to her or asked her for anything. So I abruptly screenshotted the messages, blocked her, and sent the messages to her mother. Her mom was compassionate and understanding about the whole thing. The worst part is, this woman is 29 years old and acts like a spoiled child. She tried to contact me on and off for a while. I just blocked the fake accounts and didn't read the messages. Guys, it's been a month and a half. You have no idea the relief that I feel. So yes, I ghosted someone and I don't feel a drop of guilt for it. Story 11. It depends on the situation. When it was my family and friends, I felt bad and worked to change, but when it's from strangers, I feel put off by them because it's weird when strangers feel entitled to your time, especially if you've only exchanged a few words. This is something that I've experienced on Tinder. A non-response to a stranger is a very clear form of communication. It may not be verbal, but many people prefer to use nonverbal communication in situations in which verbal is unnecessary or even hurtful. Like if I've only exchanged a couple sentences with someone on Tinder and already don't feel a connection or know that I don't jive with them, I would much rather communicate that through non-response and say, "Hey, I know you've only said like 5 words to me, but I already don't feel a connection with you." Don't get me wrong, I've tried that approach, but it usually leads to a long conversation in which they insist on knowing why and end up feeling insecure or bad about themselves, and I end up feeling guilty just because I don't feel a connection. Everyone loses. And I honestly prefer to be ghosted as well in that context. I've had a lot of guys on Tinder just stop responding and I don't feel offended by it at all, because I get what they're saying. It's pretty cut and dry. They don't want to continue talking. End of story. Now, if you've been talking regularly for a few days, then at that point, I think they deserve an explanation. But if it's only been a few sentences or one day, then I think it's pretty clear what someone is trying to tell you when they ghost you. It's just up to you to decide whether you're going to accept that message or not. Story 12. After college, I didn't have any money, so I had to go live with my mom in Kansas City. She really wanted me to meet a nice Christian girl, so she was doing anything she could to set me up with Christians. She told me once that there was a group that ate barbecue on Thursdays and had games, and it was a big get-together for college-aged people. I said, "That sounds like church, Mom. I'm not going." She said, "No, honey, it's not church. You will love it. Sandy said her son goes, and the girls there are beautiful, and there's barbecue. You'll love barbecue." I said, "No, thanks." Thursday came, and I said, "Mom, are you making dinner?" She said, "No, but you can have all the barbecue you want at the get-together." I said, "Is this church, Mom? Be honest." She said, "No, it's not a church." So I went. It was a church. But Sandy was right. The girls were beautiful, and there was a barbecue. I hit it off with a very good-looking 23-year-old named Charlene, and I told her, "Look, I'm never coming back here again, but I would like to go out with you. Can I get your number?" She gave it to me, and we decided to go out the following Saturday night. So I picked her up from her house, and the day went well. She's a little too Christian for me, but whatever. She was really good looking, so I let it slide. I thought the date went really well. So when I took her back to her place, I went in for the kiss, and we had a really passionate, steamy car kiss. The best kind. All of a sudden, she pulls away, and I say, "Is everything okay?" She says, and I quote, "That's the first time I ever kissed anyone." I said, what did you just say?" She said, "I never kissed anyone until just then." I said, okay. Why?" As far as I knew, she was completely normal, even a little charming and witty, and she was very, very attractive. Long blonde hair, beautiful green eyes, and a gorgeous smile. How did this girl get to be 23 and never kiss anyone? This is when it gets weird. When I think back on it, I picture it with a single white female horror movie vibe. She goes, "I was saving myself for you." Me. What? Her, again. "I was saving myself for you." Me. Her. Me. Her. Me. Well, I gotta go. It was so crazy. It must have had something to do with Jesus or purity or something, but I knew I had to get out of that car with her right away. But it was my car. I almost started walking away anyway. It was that weird. Finally, she got out, but she was kind of like crying. I honestly didn't know how to handle it, and I'm sure I did it wrong, but I was young and everything about it made it one of the weirdest nights of my life. I blocked her number and never talked to her again. Fast forward to 6 years later. It's a cold December night in a hospital parking lot in South Kansas City. I'm married, and my wife is on the elevator with her sister. We're going to see a young couple and their new baby. The dad was one of the youth pastors where my wife and her sister grew up in Nebraska. Running through the parking lot after us was a lone woman, and she asked us to hold the elevator. She gets on and never turns around, just stands there staring at all three of us. Already, it's beyond weird. She stares and never turns around and finally goes, "Jason? Jason?" I'm like, yeah? She points at herself and goes, "It's Charlene." "Charlene?" I go, Oh, no. I actually said the no part out loud. Charlie never turns around. She rides the whole way up in the elevator, staring at me. My wife's sister goes, do you guys know each other or something?" Charlene, "We dated." Then she stomps the snow off her boots and turns around and walks to the delivery room. She's going to the same delivery room as us. She's friends with her mom, and we knew the dad. Terribly awkward hospital visit that one was. Ghosting has never felt so wrong. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 13. Hosted a game server for about a year. I started it just for my husband and myself to play on casually, but figured if I was paying for 60 slots anyway, might as well let anyone who wants to play in as well. It ended up getting about 15 regulars, which is pretty nice for a fairly unpopular game, without any paid advertising, in my humble opinion. I don't like feeling responsible for others, but I swear, some of those people see admin and want to worship the ground you walk on. Events in 2020 had my husband and I both jobless at the same time. It was really bad. I panicked and ghosted the whole server with just a message left behind that they should transfer their stuff by the end of the month if they wanted to keep it, because I had paid through then. I felt like I had let everyone down and couldn't face them. Paid the bill, set things up for easy transfer, left a memo, and exiled myself in shame. My self-proclaimed co-admin, just some random kid who liked to help and I was happy to have it, found my Facebook through my billing info. He could see my name in the admin panel and sent me a friend request with a message, effectively saying he understood and life happens and it wasn't anything to alienate myself over. I was about to have a heart attack when I saw his friend request. I don't know why, but I just assumed it was going to be him telling me what an awful person I am or something. But it was surprisingly kind and understanding. I guess it made me about 5% less hard on myself, and it was extremely welcome. Being less hard on myself in the first place helps me to not jump ship as an impulse reaction. Story 14. Last year around March, I ghosted 2 good friends that I had made. I missed them terribly, yet I'm too afraid to reach out again. I wouldn't blame them if they didn't want to be friends again or just hang out. I probably hurt them for me dropping off like that. The reasons were that my mental health declined a lot. My depression was deepening and I was dealing with termination thoughts and overwhelming emotions nearly every day. That lasted until February of this year. I went to a doctor for help. They also already had a lot of anxiety regarding making friends and maintaining friendships. It's quite frightening for me. Probably from all the loss and betrayal in my past. Only people I didn't ghost or cut off were my family and girlfriend. Regardless, it wasn't okay to drop contact like I did. I feel terrible about it. I wish I at least communicated myself. At least, hopefully, they wouldn't have been hurt by my disengagement. I remember being too afraid and overwhelmed to do so. They don't know this, but they're the best friends I have made in years. I miss them terribly. They're kind, welcoming, and have shown me and taught me a lot. I'm doing much better now, relatively, since then, and yet I'm still terrified to reach out to them to try to communicate and see what comes of it. They would absolutely be worth all the anxiety and difficulty getting myself to try, rejection or not. Yet every time I made plans to try, I haven't followed through. Almost as if I'm in denial regarding that I want to reach out. I distract myself too much. I will make other plans, think about talking to them, yet feel frozen, stuck. Lol, and here I am expressing this to strangers on Reddit. God, I wish I had more courage regarding friendships and people close to me. Story 15. I ghosted a friend at the end of my junior year of high school after a relationship had quite a bit of strain. I don't necessarily regret leaving her, but I do regret how it was handled. The situation was that she treated me far more like a therapist than a friend. Every day, several times a day, she would bring up her worries. It was probably the main thing we talked about. She'd ask me one thing, I'd give her an answer, and she'd ask it 2 more times throughout the school day with me, giving the same answer. She also leached off of me for homework and would complain and get upset when she had a project due and it wasn't finished despite her having a month to work on it. To top it off, she also started hanging out with some questionable people, which I was uncomfortable being around. As someone who has some pretty bad OCD and anxiety myself, I understand what it's like to get obsessive toward anxious thoughts and seek reassurance. But it's incredibly hard to manage my own as well as someone else's, and I would never unload all of my problems onto my friend like that. It just gets tiresome and exhausting. She ended up having to spend her senior year at one of those schools for people with poor grades. So why do I regret how it was handled? Well, despite everything, she wasn't a bad person in my opinion. Sure, she did some problematic things, but she was almost always fairly nice until she started getting upset about how much I was hanging out with my boyfriend near the end of junior year. I wish instead of ghosting, I would have just talked about it and left on a good note. I don't have her phone number now and she has no social media I'm aware of. I know her address, but I'm sure as hell not going to someone's house in person after ghosting them for 2 years. Story 16. Not the ghoster, but the ghostee. I was ghosted in person once, while in college. It was legit one of the most surreal experiences in my life, and I had a sort of out-of-body feeling when it hit me. I'd been dating this girl for 2 to 3 months and thought we were going steady, since we'd been seeing each other on a daily basis. I should have seen the red flags, but to be honest, she'd show up to my house at 2 a.m. randomly without calling or any notice and be like, I want to be intimate. Anyway, one day we met up for the day and went to study together for the day. I had a plan that after studying, we'd freshen up and get dressed and go on a date to a nice restaurant. When we got back to my place after studying, she told me that she's going to her car real quick to get the dress out of her car so that she can change for the date. I say, cool. I go into the house. I get my stuff ready and I realize it's been 5 minutes and I had not seen her back in the house yet. I go outside and her car is gone. I was actually dumbfounded because why would she leave before a date without telling me? I text her, asking if anything is wrong, and I don't get a reply for a few hours. I think around 7 or 8 p.m., I finally got a reply from her saying that she got an emergency text from her best friend that she needed an out with a guy she was seeing for safety. And so the girl I was dating had to go ASAP and didn't have time to tell me. That was a bit strange, but I let it go. I texted her again to reschedule the date and when we could see each other again, but I only got silence. Then randomly, at like 3 a.m., I got a text from her where she sent me a picture of herself with another guy and she wrote, "Look how cute we look together," and told me that she has been with someone else for the past month and to never contact her again. She literally vanished in person and then taunted me afterwards that she was sleeping with another dude the whole time that we were together. That was pure evil. Story 17. This is one of my favorite stories from my dating days. Spent some time on Grindr in my local college town talking to this guy. He was cute, and the conversation was nice. But after a while, the chat got stale, and I, in a not proud moment, ghosted him. Cut to a few months later, and I'm at a house party, and who was there? Well, of course, it's the guy I ghosted. Not wanting to make things awkward, I kept away from him throughout the party, and all was well. I was talking with a friend and told her what was going on, and she told me that he was her +1 to the party. I did a lot of awkward, "Oh, well, it wasn't his fault. It was me," blah blah, to try and smooth it over and get away. After another 30 minutes hanging out with a different group of friends in another floor of the house, I hear some really aggressive footsteps coming downstairs. The guy I ghosted is now face-to-face confronting me. He says, "Are you really telling people that you ghosted me?" All I can say is, "Well, yeah, you were the last one to message and I stopped responding. Totally not your fault. My bad." He huffs on my response and before turning around and stomping away declares, "You know what? The ghosting was mutual." Karma came back for me after this story when a guy I started seeing later on literally ghosted me by faking a funeral for his roommate. Story 18. Yes, I unfortunately have ghosted someone. I was 18 and in a long-term relationship in high school. We dated for a little over 2 years. His best friend had told me he had been talking and seeing other girls and I couldn't understand why he was telling me this. I started to drift away from my then boyfriend, started going out with my friends and met another guy. I decided that if he was going to start messing around with other girls, well, then I was going to start seeing someone else so he could see how it felt. Well, one thing led to another and I messed around with another guy and became pregnant from this new guy that I had started seeing. I was absolutely devastated. I was still talking to my then boyfriend here and there, but we had drifted apart, so things were at an end at that point when I became pregnant. I completely ghosted him when I found out I was pregnant. I wasn't sure what to say or how to say it to him. I was ashamed, mad at myself. I was completely lost. He found out I was pregnant by one of our mutual friends when I was about 7 months along. He called me and I decided to finally answer the phone. He asked me if the rumors were true and I finally broke it to him that I was indeed pregnant by another guy. He was absolutely devastated, and I completely broke that poor boy. One of the saddest parts about the whole situation was that I'd later found out that my ex-boyfriend was not seeing nor talking to any other girls at the time. His best friend was extremely jealous of our relationship. I should have just talked to him about it, but instead, I reacted. It has since been about 14 years since that happened, and I was grateful that I was able to apologize to him as an adult a few years back for hurting him the way I did. It took me almost 10 years to get over what I had done, but now that my daughter is older, I would never have regretted or taken that back. I would have gone about it differently, but never have changed the outcome. My daughter is such a huge blessing in my life and helped me to grow into the woman I am today. So I would say overall, it was bittersweet, but I would highly recommend that no one makes the same mistake I made because it was completely hurtful for both of us and our families involved. Story 19. I've been in both positions, but have never been called out when I ghosted. Perhaps I should have, though. When I'm ghosted, I sum it up to the other person being busy or that there's a conflict in personality types. I understand that people have other things to do, and maintaining a relationship is difficult at times, so I don't take it personally. Being able to meet new people and share a conversation or two is nice. And sometimes, moving on is best for both people. When I've ghosted a few times, the reasons were the same. I was busy and didn't check social media for a few days while I took care of business. Then afterwards, I felt guilty for not responding right away and pushed it for later. I suppose I felt embarrassed that I put it off for so long and left it at that. I still think about those people and hope they're doing all right. But it would be difficult for me to initiate a conversation after I put them in a position where I'd be demonized here in the community. Perhaps if I were to be called out for ghosting, I'd apologize and try to understand how the other person feels and perceives it. If they're willing, it would also be a good idea to talk about expectations and where we'd like to go from that point. I hope this explanation helps if you're genuinely curious. And if you were ghosted recently, I hope you were able to find new friends that you have better chemistry with. Story 20. I'm pretty clear about being a bad texter or bad introvert or bad at keeping in touch. I have very little mental energy and most of it goes to work, my family, and my boyfriend. I like my friends, and I will try to answer and be present when they reach out, and if anyone ever is desperately hurt or going through something bad, I always make a point to be there for them when they come to me. I'm like the opposite of a fair weather friend. When you need me, I'm there, but the rest of the time I'm just barely hanging on mentally, and what little energy I have rarely is spent on friends. My good friends know this about me and often feel the same way, so we only talk sporadically, literally a few times a year. I understand that this makes me a bad friend to a lot of people, and I genuinely wish I were different. I hope that I may become different as I work on my mental health. I've been called out for ghosting a friend who always said she was the kind of friend who didn't need to talk every day, but just clearly expected way more from me than I could give. I feel terrible that I hurt someone, and it hurts to not have that person around sometimes, but I honestly don't think it could have gone differently. I was always clear about what I could handle, and it just didn't work for her. This was a long-winded way of saying that maybe people who are ghosting you are just in a different place or going through some stuff. And also that it's okay that some friendships won't work out. Maybe if someone takes 6 weeks to answer you when you don't reach out, it doesn't mean they hate you and don't respect you, but just that that's the level of commitment they can offer you. It doesn't have to be an insult to you. People just want and can handle different things. People are right to only want to talk once a year, just like others are simultaneously right for needing to talk daily. People are just different, and it's okay. Story 21. I'm ghosting a friend who thought of me as her best friend. We met in college, were sort of friends for years, and then she asked me to move into an apartment with her. I was living on campus at a Christian college and hated all the rules, so after a bit of thinking, I accepted. We signed a 13-month lease, but she ended up leaving 3 months early. It started when she asked me if I'd keep living with her once the lease was up, and I told her probably not, because I wanted to move out of the state as soon as I could. She pretty quickly found someone else who she'd lived with after the 13 months, but then she told me this friend wanted to move in early. She left and told me she'd keep paying her half of the rent. I didn't get another roommate because she's kind of rich. Definitely acts it. And I wanted to see what it'd be like to live alone. A month or two into me living alone, she sends me a huge text basically asking me to either end the lease early or get a roommate. Turns out she'd quit her job before leaving and still somehow expected to pay for portions of rent for 2 apartments. But the whole text blamed me for being messy, lazy, taking advantage of her family, and for letting my boyfriend live there illegally, which is just not okay. I literally let him stay with me for a week so I could do a trial run of living with my boyfriend. I made sure it was just a week. I didn't have anyone who could pay to live with me, so I decided to end the lease early and move back in with my parents till I move out of the state. I texted her to let her know, and never spoke to her again. She's been sending me the occasional text trying to patch things up, and I saw through social media that she and her boyfriend broke up. I know she feels lonely and it's awful that I'm continuously hurting her feelings by ignoring her, but for the first time, I'm only maintaining friendships with people I know I want in my life. With her, I definitely do not. Story 22. I had a really close friend that got married to this gal who worked for the astrophysics department at a university in a town about 100 miles away. My wife and I went to his wedding held out of town, danced and drank at his ceremony, and everything seemed great in his new life. I was truly happy for him. Then, like so many other friendship stories, it came to an end and that was the last I ever heard from him. I mostly took it in stride. I mean, I get it. People grow up, they get married, they have families and move on with their lives. I wasn't upset. But after a number of years passed, I started to get curious about how he was doing and how his life was progressing. Did he have kids now? Where was he working? So, with no tension between us to prevent me, I decided to try calling him up to, catch up. Except his mobile phone number had apparently been disconnected. No bother, I'll try his wife's phone number. Except that it also had apparently been disconnected. After a week or so of Googling around, I finally discovered her apartment at the university and give her a call directly at her work. That's when I found out he had passed away of a brain tumor the year before. The lesson learned was never ghost someone that you want to lose completely, because you never know when your number is up in this crazy world. Rest in peace, Skinny. I miss you, brother. Story 23. A lot of the people who I've ghosted usually already knew why they had been ghosted. Either the friendship was already falling apart or there was an incident. One guy in particular was my dealer for a while. We had dated briefly before I realized he was a dealer and had slept with him on set dates. We didn't really feel like being in a relationship with each other, but decided casual intimacy was fine. So whenever I'd go to pick up, usually we would fool around as well. It was fun. I enjoyed myself and expectations were pretty low. Eventually I started dating someone else and it got serious enough that I didn't want to stay casual with my dealer anymore. I told him honestly and he was like, sure, that's cool. He wound up pressuring me into intimacy anyways. Every time I was there. It wasn't even subtle. Even my grandpa passed away and I was like, please don't ask me about it. I'm still grieving. And even after agreeing with it via text, he still asked. I left. I never bought from him again. He texted me ages later trying to be all tough and angry with me about ghosting me. I sent a picture of the text I sent and then explained that he was a total schmuck about not asking for intimacy every time I saw him. He was super creepy about it. Good riddance. Story 24. Ghosting is one of the single most awful things I think you can do to someone you know or are close with. Random strangers and creeps are the exception. I didn't ghost anyone, but I was, and I guess still am, ghosted by my former best friend. Not to get too into the history, this guy had a tendency to flip his attitude every time either something mildly inconvenient happened or if anyone criticized him in any way, no matter how wrong he was. We shared similar interests and he was great to hang out with, etc. So I looked past it before he got too comfortable. So anyway, the guy dishes out a lot of BS and disrespect to people on account of the inability to admit when he was wrong, putting up with it for years, and when we were hanging out with another friend and he was being an absolute schmuck to me, snapping at me and giving me looks, all because I was trying to engage while the two of them were playing a tabletop game. I decide that I'm not going to put up with it. He gets mad because he thinks I'm at fault. I say he's been terrible. He then asks why I bother him and then we both leave super angry. He then, a few days later, removed me off of everything and cut contact. All because he was being a schmuck and I called him out on it. In the end though, it shed light on who the guy really was, so I'm in a weird way content with how it played out. People like that are an absolute toxicity in life and I'm glad I was able to avoid it. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.